whole range of issues related to the nuclear negotiations, but we will begin with history, obviously, and ask Roberto to tell us something about his experience as an ambassador in Iran in the end of the 90s and early 2000s.
Well, yes. He asked me to say that in 7 minutes, so I will try. Yes, I arrived in Iran in 2000.
Where all powers goes even from the Supreme Leader. The Supreme Leader needs himself to navigate in a complex water. He is not the founding father, which is a big difference. The authority of Khomeini, he does not have. It's also, I think, it's important to understand the society, which is very, very different. The leadership is in principle the same who did the revolution in 79-80. It is still the governing elite, which is often used. It's a structure that did the revolution, including the president. Rouhani was a part of the revolution. But you have a society which is simply consists of the children of the revolution. 70% of the population is under 35, i.e. they were born after the revolution. I think and colleagues will speak about the negotiations, so I would just say that the expectations among the 70% and the new generation of what will happen if there is a nuclear agreement will be a big challenge for the leadership. I try to interview lots of young people living there. One or two things one should keep in mind. One is a very strong patriotic feeling of Iran. You may or may not like the system. You don't identify yourself with the revolution. You more identify yourself with the war between Iran and Iraq. That is, for me, one of the striking things. That is, for someone who is 23, that is very much a defining moment, not so much the revolution. It's also a society where these expectations will have a long period of bad economic development. You blame everything on the sanctions. That is just to make it too easy. If there is a agreement over the sanctions, we know that there will be need to take a look at reforming of the economy. And there again, you have different interests in this complex power structures. They're not only political power structures, they're also economic power structures which form a part of the political setup. And there is another interesting aspect. As far as I know, no country in the world has the same brain drain as Iran. Will it be possible to get all these clever Iranians back? I don't know. The history tells us if you are away in the diaspora, you don't necessarily come back. But there is a brain drain, which will be an impediment, I would argue, for economic development. I think there's also, as you are saying, there's also a very traditional society. Regardless if you are very religious or not, it is a very, very traditional, I would say, conservative society. How that will work out will be interesting when changes will have to happen. To what extent will a young generation accept not being hooked up to internet on the same speed that you are? It's just a small little issue, but it comes back. And it's important to understand, I came to Iran first time 1992. I've then been dealing much more with Central Eastern Europe in the better days. It's important to understand that Iranians travel. Iranians are well informed about what happens outside of the country, and I'm quite convinced that will also translate into these expectations. If there is now this opening which you spoke about, what will be the openings on the other side? So for me, this is
to continue procuring nuclear technology for its nuclear energy program. Now, one of the things that has been introduced in this agreement that I think is fairly important, especially for the Iranians, is this procurement network that will be granted to Iran, which means that Iran won't have to go to the black market anymore to get pieces and equipment for its nuclear program. Instead, it will have a procurement network that will be monitored, that will be verified, that will allow it to continue growing its nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, and will allow the international community to see what's going on there. The third and fourth points go hand in hand, and that has to do with the two paths to the bomb, which essentially means enrichment and reprocessing, highly enriched uranium or plutonium. On the plutonium side, the heavy water reactor in Iraq has been a center of attention for the past few years. And what is going to happen is that there's going to be a redesign, which means that there's going to be less production of plutonium, but as the Iranians want it, it's not going to be converted into a light water reactor. What Iran is also going to do is to reiterate and make it official something that has been saying for long, which is that it won't be taking on any reprocessing activities, which essentially means that the plutonium won't be used for a bomb. And this will be for 15 years. It's also saying that it's not going to be building any more heavy water reactors. It will build light water reactors instead. This, I think, is also a major achievement, especially given how difficult this technical aspect was and how much back and forth there was in the initial stages of the negotiations.
This. In Syria, Iran is a vital player. It's wholeheartedly involved through funding and military assistance. And this, despite a lot of questioning within the ranks in Iran, but also within the Iranian population that questions Iran's involvement in Syria when they have so many problems at home. So what does that mean? That means that today there's not really any solution to the Syrian crisis without having Iran involved at the negotiating table. But the problem is the Gulf states, and Saudi Arabia in particular, refuses to sit at a table with Iran. So the question then becomes, how do you move forward from this point? In my view, the Gulf states actually don't have much to fear from a deal with Iran. Firstly, because for the long-term stability of the region, a nuclear deal is absolutely necessary. More importantly, in order to address their fear about whether a U.S.-Iran friendship would actually marginalize them, well, I think, as I said before, we are so far from a U.S.-Iran relationship, friendship, hell, we're even far from U.S.-Iran cooperation at this stage. We're only talking very, very low-level coordination, largely because hardliners both in Iran and in the U.S. are just not prepared and not ready to have any kind of formal communication between both countries. So in terms of the possible regional outcomes that have been mentioned following a deal, one that I hear a lot is if we get a nuclear agreement, then we might end up with a proliferation cascade scenario. What does this mean? That means that you have many variables of this particular argument. One is saying that, if Iran has a nuclear deal, it legitimizes its nuclear program, and this will mean that everybody else in the region will go after nuclear programs. The other scenario is, if it legitimizes Iran's nuclear program and Iran eventually cheats or breaks out and goes for the bomb, then everybody else in the region will also do the same. Now, firstly, if everybody else goes for nuclear power, then the first caveat to that is there's nothing worrying about nuclear power. Nuclear power as such, civilian nuclear power is arguably, I'd say is good, but that's a different debate. But it's not something which everybody should be afraid of. It can be conducted within, the laws that have been put in place and within the non-proliferation regimes. What's more worrisome is if you find yourself in a scenario where ultimately countries in the region will want to pursue the bomb. Again, in my view, and we can go into this a little bit more later if you're actually interested, there are political, economic, security, and major international constraints to any states pursuing this. It's very, very unlikely to happen. The second regional outcome that the states in the region have mentioned is that with a deal, the region fears that Iran will become increasingly hardline because its power and influence in the region would be recognized. I have two counter-arguments to that. Firstly, without a deal, you could say the same thing. If Iran doesn't have an agreement and it's, you're no longer in a position where you're talking to Iran, well, then Iran will also become more hardline, and it has more reason to do exactly what it wants to do in the region. Secondly, a deal will give Iran a certain number of carrots, including economic benefits, and the benefits that go along with opening up towards the West and being reintegrated into the international system, which means that perhaps you'll be able to coax it to act as a more responsible actor in the international arena, much more so than if, in my view, than if there is no agreement. And so I think I'll stop there and then
there will be Iranian hegemony. But not accepting Iranian hegemony doesn't mean that you can envisage Iranians' exclusion and isolation. Between those two, there is politics and there is diplomacy. But if you're so afraid of somebody else being overwhelmingly strong, because you're quite aware of your own weakness, it is not military. The Saudis don't lack weapons, advanced weapons, and they have an ally that's called the United States of America. So, militarily, let's be serious. They feel weak politically because those states are not based upon societies and political structures, and, it's enough to read EIRG Human Development Report, UNDP, 2002 and following years, and you see all the reasons for weakness. Weak governance, lack of rule of law. Compared to that, Iran is not a democracy, but it's a modern state, a state with a functioning state. Of course, if you're not a functioning state, any state will look terrifying to you. So the problem is that they should be strong inside in order to have a normal, sometimes adversarial, sometimes cooperative relationship with Iran. But this is not the case, which makes me think that the situation will not improve soon. To have
Iran, and what kind of cooperation will there be? We should remind that Iran and the US had very close cooperation in Afghanistan in 2001-2002, and it worked out very nicely. And it was the now Iranian foreign minister who, in a big conference in Bonn, I was there as a Swedish ambassador to Afghanistan, made the trick. So there are experiences. There was also willingness to discuss stabilization in Iraq after the U.S. invasion. I think this is also one of the dilemmas which I tried to point at, is that at the same time there's a fear of what is locally labeled as a cultural invasion. It's not necessarily stabilizing a region where many of the actors, the regional, including Europe and the US, do have very similar interests when it comes to stabilizing Iraq, stabilizing Syria in particular, the whole issue about Islamic State and things like that. But in the Iranian context, you are then very close to something which I don't want. This is cultural invasion, because that would probably have, or could very easily have an appeal on those 70% which I referred to before, who are not necessarily a part of the making of the revolution, who have other interests. And there, just one thing that I should have mentioned, but which I didn't, is that in this young generation, when you look at your academic colleagues in Iran, 60% of students are female, are women, but only 20% of them get a job afterwards. Again, as a very sort of conservative society, for me, cultural invasion has all these dimensions, which will be very interesting to follow if there is a deal. Which will be the next step that the government and the regime can take, and where will the serious political impediments really show? Because that will then address internal, still unresolved issues in the Islamic Republic, where I'm increasingly reaching a point of view that the big issue in the Islamic Republic is the role of women. It's not addressed, and neither Sweden 1979 is the same as Sweden 2015, and Iran 1979 is very different from what we experienced those guys who live there. So it's again, how do you sort of get what you may need on the security side without getting the other things that you don't want?